webinar is titled Low-Hanging Fruit, How to Improve Student Performance of Those Already in the System. Part 1. This is the first iteration of a two-part series, and it will be facilitated by Neil Kelly of the CAEP office as well as Jay Wright of CASAS. As I've mentioned before, the PowerPoint is available to download and is located in the Resources pod. Select the file and then select Download, and it will download to whatever browser your computer downloads files to. Throughout the webinar, if you have any questions, please be sure to post them in the chat pod. Throughout today's webinar, one of the facilitators will address your questions. If your question is not answered immediately, just hold tight, and at the time your question will be answered. In addition, if you're experiencing any technical issues, please be sure to type that into the chat pod, and either myself or another member of the team will be able to assist you. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be available on the California Adult Education website later on this afternoon, and I'll be sure to post the URL of exactly where you can locate the recording as well as the PowerPoint presentation. So if you need to refer back to it at a future date, or you would like to share with your colleagues, it will be available for you at that time. Now I will turn it over to Neil Kelly, who will get us started with today's webinar. Neil?
Thanks, Veronica. So we have about 40 people on the line. I'm going to give a brief kind of introduction and go through a few slides, and then I'll turn it over to Jay. Jay's going to do the deep dive today. So let's look at our agenda. So I'll talk about statewide data numbers, kind of the adult ed student journey, and then Jay will take the lion's share of the agenda, and a lot of detailed stuff, a lot of good information. He'll even do a follow-up. I think it's next week, part 2. Jay, when will you be doing?
It's next Wednesday. We'll take a dive today, but it'll be a fairly shallow dive today. The deeper dive will definitely be next Wednesday, but nonetheless, generally right track for sure.
Okay, great. So it'll be a real good session, these next few sessions. If you're one of those consortia that doesn't seem to be, or a member district that has people coming in, but somehow you're not retaining them, or they're getting to the classroom, but they're not making it 12 hours of instruction, which is our outcome pool. So a lot of good information. This is stuff that we've been stressing the last 10 years of the program, and so it's nothing new, but it is always good to revisit this stuff and look at your data, look at what your students are doing, look at how you're capturing student information, how you're tracking students, and so all good information. So with that, let's begin. So I'm going to give you guys some insider information that's only privileged to you on this call or the webinar. So the unduplicated student count for the state is close to about 800,000 students for the program from 17-18. That's a 10% increase from the prior year. Our duplicated student count is closer to 1 million, and so those are students that are enrolled in multiple programs. Currently we have 378 districts, which includes county offices, colleges, K-12 adult schools, and ROPs that are reporting student enrollment. And that's a 23% increase in the number of reporting districts from the prior year. So we keep adding more districts. We're getting better access to our students. We're covering areas that possibly did not have services in their area. So all good stuff. So going to the next slide, I did a little cost comparison. So I took the number of participants from 17-18, and that would be the number of students that are reaching the 12-hour mark, and so and divided that into or by the amount of money we're handing out, and so that came out to a little over $1,000 per student statewide. Now that doesn't include those students that are receiving services that don't make it to the 12-hour mark, coming in for counseling, short-term workshops that are less than 12 hours. But even despite that, we're still at about $1,000 per student. And if you compare that to a 2-year college nationwide, it's $9,000. If you compare that to a 4-year college, it's $14,000. So we're still the bang for the buck is still pretty good for adult education, and it's free. So we're not actually charging our students $1,000, but that's the overall cost. So I thought that was a good benchmark there to look at. So going to the next slide. So this is where Jay's going to do a little deep diving today and a little deeper dive next week. So if you look at, wait, Thatcher had a question. Is that $14,000? Yeah, that's per year cost. So that would be the annual cost, Thatcher. Thank you for the question or the clarification. So if you look at statewide enrollment, so we're looking at enrolled students that make it to 1 hour of instruction. So that would be into the classroom. So 77%, and this is statewide average, or statewide percentage, 77% of our students that enroll actually make it into the classroom. And so the next statistic is of those students that make it to 1 hour of instruction, or actually of those enrolled students, how many make it to 12 hours or more of instruction? And that's only 63%. So you can see how that drops a little bit. And there's a lot of things that go into the enrolled student count. Like I said before, enrolled students could be coming for not instruction, they could be coming for counseling, they could be coming for supportive services, they could be coming for counseling services, transition services, you name it. And so that might not be reflected in the 1 hour of instruction. Then to make it to 12 hours of instruction, all kinds of things could be happening with the student. We'll talk about that later. But it does drop, and we know that there's a drop, and that some students don't make it to the 12 hours of instruction. And so, that's a good question there listed. What is happening to those students that come to the school site, enroll, but never make it to our 1 to 12 hours of instruction? What is preventing them? And I looked at a couple of possible reasons, and Jay's going to talk about this. And maybe they are accessing services and don't need classroom instruction. Maybe our data systems are picking up students or not picking up students for instructional hours. In fact, I know for a fact we had some programs that reported enrollment, but for some reason didn't report anything other than enrollment. And so we have about 23 to 24,000 students in our system, is because that school district or that college or that county office couldn't somehow report that student data, give us more than just the enrollments. And we're working to fix that. But if you're in a region with a large program that only reported enrollment and did not report instructional hours or outcomes, that could lead to your percentages to drop quite a bit. And you wouldn't know that until you started looking at your data. So that's another thing we found out as we look at the local data. Also, students might be working one or more jobs that make it difficult to attend. They might have had a real good idea to start taking a class, but work and life gets in the way, and so they might not even made it to the classroom, or they tried it for a week and it didn't work out. Other things we're seeing is maybe your placement or appraisal process isn't placing the students effectively, or it's too complex and the students don't continue, or they might be in a classroom that's not appropriate for them, so they don't come back. So all these things kind of weigh in. Or in the case of any program, I know community college non-credit is free, but there's also fees attached to some of the things at the community college. On the K-12 side, CTE could be charged. The other programs are free, but there could be other costs. I'm not sure if book deposits are still around. There are kind of parking fees at the colleges, could be health fees, other fees that are associated, and who knows if that is too much for students to handle and they don't come back. Another issue that we see are childcare. Sometimes childcare isn't available, or maybe it's too expensive. They can't get a voucher, or they don't have those supports available. And of course, it's always difficult to balance family and school, as well as work and school and other things. And then we have transportation issues as well in some of the areas. So those are just a few. That's not all, but I wanted to highlight those. Jay's going to cover some of this a little bit later, but just an intro to that. And then when we get into the instructional hours, so students with 1 hour of instruction that make it to 12 hours of instruction, and this would be the 12 hours instruction is our outcome pool for our California Adult Ed program, 82%. So you can see kind of this upward trend. We have, enrollment to 1 hour, and then 1 hour to 12 hours. So if you can get them into the classroom at 1 hour, the chances that they make it to 12 hours is a lot better, because you looked at the enrollment to 1 hour is 77%. And so that, if you can get there, and then when we look at after 12 hours. So those are things to look at, and like I said, it seems like once the student gets into the classroom, the chances of them getting to 12 hours is more likely. And Jay will review kind of persistent reports and other ways to track retention. So, so the resource pod is in the left-hand corner. Oh, okay. Veronica covered that. And so just a reminder before I turn it over to Jay, is our students' journey, that's a non-traditional journey. It's different than that traditional high school to college journey. Our students have a variety of different life pathways and journeys. It'll even vary among our program areas if you're on the ABE student journey versus the ESL student journey versus the CTE student journey. Those will all vary as well within our program, not to mention just the adult student in general. Our students have different destinations and milestones, different goals, such as college and work and family life enrichment. So all those things factor into that retention and those percentages that I went over. And just briefly, the program areas, but we have some real strong barriers for our students. So we have students that haven't finished elementary school that have literacy or reading comprehension issues. And some of these adult basic ed students have, maybe they were in jail, or they have mental health issues, or they even have dependency problems with drugs and alcohol. We also have students with severe learning disabilities, but don't have a K-12 district to support them. Either they're timed out, meaning they're aged out, or they weren't aware of those K-12 support mechanisms, and so they still need those life and learning skills, and so they come to our program as well. We also have high school dropouts coming back to get their diploma or equivalency, and then we have parents that are trying to get strategies or understand how to work with their children in the K-12 environment. And so that's another program, not necessarily exclusive to parents, but it makes up a big part of that program. And of course, we have short-term vocational and pre-apprenticeship programs to get a job or a better job. And then we also have programs that help middle-aged or older students that are needing to get back in the workforce or sharpen up their skills to stay employable. And then finally, we have our largest program is students that are taking English as a second language courses or vocational ESL, or utilizing immigrant services for integration into our community. So with that said, let's turn it over to Jay. I have a lot more of this data, and I think I'm going to be working on it later this year, maybe presenting at CCAE a little bit deeper dive into the regions and looking at all this good stuff. But finally, just a quick update. as you know, March 1st, we have the closeout report in NOVA. We also have your second quarter expense reports. Those are all supposed to be certified by your consortia lead by the end of March. And then I just released a newsletter about an hour ago, which has your 1920 preliminary allocations. So how much you're going to get this next year, and your COLA is listed. You can go in and look at that now. Don't get off the webinar though. We also have at the end of April the TOPS Pro third quarter, and then May 2nd we have the CFAD, which is based on those preliminary allocations, and then going into June we have the 3-year plan due. So as you can see, not too much, but some big ticket items coming up, and so this might be a good time to reflect back on kind of making better use of your performance data, your data in TOPS Pro. And so with that, we'll turn it over to Jay to look at a better or a deeper dive on this subject. So Jay,
Thank you
take it
very
away.
much. Okay, so Veronica moved to my, and sorry, we're a little bit out of sync on formatting. So you can see now the formatting is different, so we're officially kind of into my turf. Like Neil said, we are planning on doing a deeper dive overall. Probably today, like I said, we'll probably stick with, you might say, a dive, but more of a shallower dive. This PowerPoint to kind of overview like concepts similar to what Neil presented, though probably here on my part, we're going to tie it more directly to data, tie it more directly to the TE reports and so on. Next week, we'll take a deeper dive. We'll get more into the using things like drill down, right-clicking, converting reports to Excel to do a deeper dive, and then we'll kind of use today and next week to hopefully prepare for a small number of regional sessions we'll be doing in March, April, May that will be a deeper dive yet. The long story short is we've brought up different ways of doing things like drilling down and using Excel in lots of ways, for you to use your data more productively. So we'll be doing some deeper dive sessions regionally in labs where we'll try to get into it more. So we'll use the webinar today and the webinar next week to try to, set that up a little bit to try to quote unquote whet everybody's appetite and so on. So for this one, I want to briefly review the reports just because I kind of feel like people will feel gypped if we don't at least mention it. I do want to tie it all to data, so if I don't at least mention these reports, I don't think it will work quite right. I want to talk about a concept for federal reporting called NRS Performance and Persistence. If you've been doing WIOA 2 over the years, this will be very much a review. This is very much in the category of things we've been forcing down everybody's throat in WIOA land forever and ever. So we'll be reviewing it a little bit just to make sure everybody knows what we're talking about, a little bit to introduce it for those of you who do AEP reporting but may not necessarily be doing NRS/WIOA 2. Then we'll be relating these concepts that we've been talking about for a long time for NRS to how you can apply that to CAEP data reporting. So I'll say some of that is just using those same performance and persistence concepts that we've talked about forever and just saying, well, hey, instead of using your Fed tables, here's the AEP reports you can use to get the exact same information from that perspective. Then, as you know, as Neil just mentioned, and he's been talking about it for a few months now, he's been introducing these new concepts that he's been talking about to everybody on different ways to measure things statewide and also suggesting different ways that you can measure, this by agency. So what I'm going to attempt to do here is show how we can measure that with our AEP reports and also attempt to connect it to our NRS concepts. And then, overall, we'll be looking at diagnoses when performance and persistence rates are low versus when they're high. And then we'll get into some laundry listing here toward the end, similar to what Neil brought up, some suggestions for strategies you might employ. And in general, there's different strategies that are more appropriate depending on what your data shows. So that's going to be the big part here, is just trying to, kind of overgeneralizing the situations data-wise, trying to tie it up into 3 or 4 different situations and basically matching some specific suggestions to each one of those situations. Hopefully by the end it will all kind of sort out and make sense. So real briefly, this is all review here for a couple minutes. Everybody, I think, knows where to find the CAEP reports in TE. It's in the state reports menu in TE, and that's where all of our various AP, ABG reports are located. We have the CAEP Summary. This is the one that we've been advertising for a couple years now as the bread and butter of AP reporting. It has all of our AP outcomes and services on one report, all of the programs to the left. We've had these 3 sections that we've been talking about for quite a while. Eyeballing the list, I think just about all of you on this list have heard this many times already, but maybe a few of you haven't. So just to make sure we're all on the same page, we've got 3 basic sections to this AP Summary report. Simply put, left-hand section, middle section, right-hand section. Left-hand section is what I've called the highest bar. That's for literacy gains. The left-hand section is all about our results related to pre- and post-testing. Because it relates to pre- and post-testing, we maintain the high bar, that is the high standards from federal reporting. It requires demographics. It requires hours of instruction. It also requires pre- and post-testing. The middle section is capturing all of your outcomes aside from pre- and post-testing. So that section is requiring demographics and hours of instruction, but it doesn't have anything to do with pre- and post-testing, so it doesn't require anything to do with that. Then the right-hand section for services, that's the low bar. We don't require demographics for that. We don't require hours of instruction. We don't even require class or program. As long as you have a correctly recorded service, it will fit there. There's lots of reasons that we've talked about here more recently where you may want to provide more information than that for those students that receive services, but all that's required is in an ID and a correctly recorded service. If you've done that bare minimum, it will show up here on the report. Okay, so moving along, here's our data integrity. Again, this is what we use for a quarterly submission. This should also be review for the overwhelming majority of you. Again, we have the top section that's basically looking at who qualifies for AP reporting, and then we have 27 items where we provide that item count and percentage of all of these items. Some are mandatory for reporting, others are more just FYI items and everything in between, but we've got a lot of different items here where we provide that item count and percentage for the reporting. We'll be digging deeper into this here next week, but here we're just table setting to say, yes, this is another resource you'll want to use. And so with that, I'm going to move into NRS reporting. And to be clear, this is not what you really need to know for AP, but I'm going to talk a little bit about NRS tables for a minute to basically, define these 2 concepts of NRS performance and persistence. So don't worry about the details of Table 4, but I'm showing it to you. This is for federal reporting. So the 50% or probably more like 2/3 of you that do, we owe it to, are familiar with this. But at the federal level, we have federal tables that we're required to use when we report to the feds. There's a bunch of them, but one of the biggies is called Table 4. Table 4 is one of those federal tables that are used to measure educational gains. That is, this is the table for federal reporting that captures pre-post test results. So I'm not going to get into the gory details here at all, but I'm just pointing out that the feds have this table for pre- and post-testing. They boil it down to 12 levels, 6 levels for ABEASE, 6 levels for ESL. Making a long story short, the pre-test score determines which of these levels the student places into. The post-test score determines whether or not they make a gain You can't really read it all, and it's not really that important for this purpose, but column D in this table is the column that basically shows the students that successfully made a level gain. As an aside, that's not so trivial to AP, because the number who make a level gain in column D are meeting the exact same pre- and post-test criteria that students who make a level gain in that column in the AP Summary do. So the conditions needed for a gain in federal reporting identical to the conditions needed to make a gain for AP, but the table we need for federal reporting obviously is a lot different. So I'm not going to bore you with the details, but we basically look at how many make a level gain, and then on this federal table we have this column I over here that basically gives you the percentage of each of those 12 federal levels. That is, we break down our overall WIOA 2 population into 12 levels. For each of those levels, what percentage of students at each level successfully made that pre-post-test learning gain. So I'm going to pause. I took the plank yesterday. It worked. I walked the plank yesterday. It worked out really well yesterday. I'm going to try it again today. So just to be clear, is everybody with me, yes or no? We're a little bit bigger group today than yesterday, but I'm going to suicide mission anyway and ask you this annoying question repeatedly to make sure everybody's following me and I'm not just talking to a brick wall. Okay, so people are saying yes. So far, yes. Okay, that's a good way of putting it. Everybody who's responded is very positive. Okay, yeah, yes, if you're not WIOA funded, you can still look at Table 4. Just know that there are some designation issues where if you're not WIOA 2, the data may or may not resonate based on how you've marked certain things in your data. If you're not WIOA 2, there may be certain things you're not required to do. If so, your data may be a little bit off. But if you're just asking, Amy, can you go to the menu and run it? Yes, you can. There's nothing TE-wise that prevents you from actually running these reports. So anyway, you can run this Table 4, and again, you know, the whole purpose of this is very similar to what we're doing in AP. As an aside, we also have a Table 4B. I probably am boring you too much with this already, but 4B is set up a lot like Table 4. It's also measuring pre-post learning gains. It's set up in the same with the same 12 levels. The difference, though, is Table 4 is looking at percentage of students across those 12 levels for everybody who qualifies for federal reporting. 4B is looking at only those students with the valid pre-post pair. So at the end of the day, when we're reporting to the feds compute these levels based on everybody. If you have a student that has a pre but no post, the feds don't care. That still counts against you. You need to get everybody pre and post tested. If you don't, that still counts against you. But there is another table you can run that only looks at those who have a pair if you feel like the more valid way to measure your student performance is by only looking at those with a pre-post pair. So we've got Table 4 that looks at the universe of everybody, that is everyone who qualifies for federal reporting. 4B is a subset of those on Table 4, that is of those who qualify for Table 4, which of those have a pre-post pair. So bottom line is if they're on 4B, there's a 100% chance they're also on Table 4, but the vice versa of that, not necessarily the case. So moving along. In TE, this is digging a little deeper, but another report we have in TE is called the Persister. If you've been at this with me over the years with WIOA 2, you've probably heard me say this is for a long time been one of my favorite TE reports. And yes, it's my favorite TE report for all those obnoxious sort of reasons that are probably mostly annoying to everybody other than me. But nonetheless, I really like it because it simply compares Table 4 to 4B. At the end of the day, what it basically does is that for those same 12 federal reporting levels that we've just talked about on Table 4 and 4B, it basically shows what percentage of students got pre and post tested. Again, it's comparing Table 4 to 4B. As I just got through saying, the only difference between 4 and 4B is that presence of a pre-post pair. So if you simply take the percentage of those who qualify for Table 4 who also qualify for 4B and just do that simple calculation, all you're basically doing is looking at each level and looking to see what percentage of students at each level were successfully pre- and post-tested. So that sounds like kind of a trivial detail, but in my mind, that particular piece of information can be used to do a lot of troubleshooting at the agency level. So we've got a whole hour coming up of suggestions, so you can agree or disagree, but at a bare minimum, it triggers lots of different suggestions on different ways we can look at our data just using this concept alone. So real quick, with the persistence, just so you know the formula, again, this is just looking at the main columns here. So again, we've got those 12 levels. Column B on the report shows how many qualified for Table 4. Column C on the report shows how many of those also qualified for Table 4B. So if we simply look at column C divided by column B, that gives us the percentage of persister in column D. That is that percentage at each level that successfully got a pre-post pair. So because I just gave you an obnoxious formula, I will pause again here. Is everybody still with me, yes or no? Okay, and sorry, I'm going to keep doing this to you somewhat annoyingly. Okay, everybody's saying yes. All right, great. Okay, there were a couple people that looked like they were typing questions when I brought that up. So I don't see any questions, so I'll just keep going here, I guess. Okay, so thank you for humoring me. Bethany's asking statewide averages. I don't know them off the top of my head, but in these slides, there's a slide on the CAEP data portal. I'm pretty sure, Bethany, you're familiar with it, but on the data portal, there's several years worth of data. It goes back, I think, as far as 04, 05, and you can find that 10 or 12 years worth of statewide goals and statewide averages. To be clear, the averages and goals we have are for the federal reporting agencies, not necessarily AEP, but I would say those basic averages that you use, you're using them because you're needing a rule of thumb. So I kind of think as long as you just need a rule of thumb, those averages that you have on the data portal, as well as those goals that you have on the data portal, should serve just fine. So you're confirming that, so I'll say, then yeah, I feel like my data portal answer is a valid answer. No, I see your question, Layla. So to be clear, okay, sorry, Layla, I'm going to go back on you. So you're talking about column B here on this slide, correct, Layla? Okay, thank you. So column B table. So bottom line is everybody on this report has 12 hours. Okay, that's the first thing. The ones who qualify for Table 4 have 12 hours, and the demographics, that's all they have. The ones in column C have that. In addition to that, they have a valid pre-post pair. So you can qualify for federal reporting without necessarily having a pre-post. You need, way TMI here, but you asked, so I'm going overboard here with you. To qualify for federal reporting, you need what the feds call a qualifying pretest. That is, you need the qualifying pretest so you get into one of these levels for ABE or ESL. The pretest is just part of the process. However, you can qualify for federal reporting without necessarily having the pre-post pair. That's obviously what you need if you want to get results, but it's not necessarily what you need just to get on the reports, period. So column C here in this graphic is showing of those that qualify for federal reporting, how many of those have a pre-post pair. At most agencies, we're talking about a completely different number. Okay, thanks, Layla. Good question. If you have the question, I'm sure lots of others have it. So anyway, this next slide is using the concept in federal reporting I've just been trying to explain, and as well as those new concepts that Neil has been talking about. We'll just say since the beginning of 2019, we did submit that statewide TE data from 17-18. Ever since, Neil has been diligently playing with the data. He's come up with some of his own concepts that he presented there in those 10 or 12 slides at the beginning. So what we want to do first off is we're going to show how you can measure that persistence concept using your AEP report so you don't have to go to the NRS tables. Obviously, some of you are not WIOA 2, so if you use the federal tables, that's not going to work for you. So we're going to show you how to do it with AEP reports rather than NRS tables. And then we're also going to look at the areas that Neil has been bringing up. So there's that one concept he's bringing up, talking about how many of those who actually show up, how many actually enroll in a program. Then his other question is, of those who enroll in a program, how many get 12 hours? And then of those who get the 12 hours, how many actually achieve outcomes? So in my mind, those are very similar concepts to that federal concept that they call persistence. They're very similar concepts, but just using slightly different metrics. So I'm using my own titles for this, and then I'm also going to show you how you can basically use those same AEP reports to measure what Neil has brought up as well. Yes, you can use the drill down and the persister as well as Table 4 and 4B. I'm not going to get into those examples today, but the training we do next Wednesday is going to be all you can stomach and more related to things like drilling down, right-clicking, and so on. So I'll just say stay tuned for that, Will. Okay, so without further ado, we'll start with what I just introduced of measuring persistence. So to figure out persistence, and so for starters, so we're starting with apples and apples, we'll talk about the same persistence concept that I just brought up for NRS. That is from a federal reporting point of view. When they talk about persistence, they're really just talking about pre and post testing. Those of you who are WIOA 2 know that if you don't have pre and post testing, you really are going to fail and fail miserable for anything related to federal reporting. For AP, that's not quite as, absolute as it is for federal reporting. But again, we'll start with that concept because that's the one that from my federal reporting lens seems the most integral to this. So again, we're talking about pre-post persistence. So obviously that means we need to take that pre-post literacy gains section of the CAEP Summary. So you can see that in the screenshot. So again, we're looking at that pre-post section. So again, we have that column B that shows those who qualified for that section. So related to Layla's question, that's basically the exact same number as what you'd get as if you ran, Table 4. That is, that is those that have 12 hours, those that have demographics, and those who have that qualifying pre-test. That's what it takes to get into column B of the CAEP Summary. Then column D are the ones who make that gain from pre to post and actually achieve an AP literacy gain. Then that column C is what we've added in kind of as a courtesy, as a way to evaluate, and that's what I'm getting at here, where you can see, okay, we have the number of enrollees in each AP program that qualify. Of those enrollees, here's how many have a pre-post pair. So we have some numbers here just so we have something to play with to demonstrate the concept. So here we're just saying divide the total in column C divided by those in column B. So you can see we're looking, we're dividing 28 by 72, 21 by 46, and so on. So I'm talking numbers. So I'll pause again. Does everybody see how we're dealing with these numbers and where, I just rattled off numbers out of thin air. Does everybody see where I'm getting the numbers from? Sorry, I'm going to be a little obstinate and force you to answer that one before I move on. Okay, everybody's saying yes, that's your story. So is this unduplicated? Yes, these are our outcomes from the CAEP report. So yeah, these are going to be, these are going to be the unduplicated totals. I mean, the enrollees You can have, enrollees in more than one program. So yes, if you have a learner, so sorry, Paul, I'm going to belabor your question a little bit. You asked for it, you got it. Looking at these numbers in a vacuum. So looking at, for example, the 72, 28, and 14 in ESL, those are unduplicated. Now to be clear, the ESL, those 72 ESL learners potentially could also show up in one of those item counts in another program. That's that, unduplicated within program, duplicated across program we've been talking about over the last couple years, where if a student is in ESL and they're also in Career Tech Ed, that student will get counted twice, once under ESL, once under Career Tech Ed. So sure, one of those 72 under ESL in my example could also show up in the item count for Career Tech Ed. However, if you look at those 72 in a vacuum, it's definitely unduplicated because it's unduplicated within program. If the student's enrolled in 4 different ESL classes, then yes, we will unduplicate it and only count that student once within the context of that program. Yes, if you run it at the agency level, that'll get you the unduplicated numbers. So just know a student could be counted twice, but when you're doing the calculations and doing the column C divided by column B, you'll be doing a series of unduplicated numbers because it is unduplicated within program. Okay, hopefully that's it. I'm thinking, Paul, you're asking great questions, but if I go too much further, I'm going to start losing people if I birdwalk much more there. So hopefully that covers it. But anyway, we're doing column B divided by column C. We're bringing up this as some purposeful examples where we're not so good, because what we're saying, and this relates to Bethany's question from a couple minutes ago when she's asking about averages, the long story short, if you look at the last 5 or 6 years of NRS data, our statewide average persistence rate has been about 70%. I think our most recent year is like 72.1 or something, but we've been around that 70, 71, 72% every year since about 2011. We've dipped up, dipped down, whatever, but I'll just say if you're looking for a nice, easy number, think of 70% as the average persistence rate. If you're 70% or better in terms of persistence, it's safe to say you're doing okay. If you're below 70%, then that's a good indicator that persistence might be part of your issue and it might be something that you want to consider correcting. Okay, so I'm going to back up, and I gave this issue for persistence. So yes, Paul. So to be clear, right now I'm just looking at the agency level, Paul. But yes, you could run this by agency and get your agency levels. I'll be getting more into that distinction in the webinar next week, but and I will be showing the checkbox in more detail. But I'm sure you've done this because we've had so many offline discussions. But when you run those consortium level reports in TE, when you get the AP summary, as you know, usually you're going to get a different summary for each agency in your consortium, but there is a checkbox called aggregate across multiple agencies where you can basically get the summary total of all the agencies in your consortium and basically look at it that way if you like, if you're more interested in your consortium persistence rate. Again, this though is looking at it from an agency point of view, not larger consortium piece. Okay, so moving along here, that's persistence. So now we're looking at one of Neil's questions. So one of the questions he asks is, he's asked it before, he brought it up in those earlier slides, how many AP students actually make it into a program? So again, he's saying of everybody that just shows up and had something recorded somehow, some way, how many actually enrolled in a program? So as we said, that right-hand section that we use for services literally has no criteria other than a unique student ID. So as long as they have an ID, that is, they showed up to orientation, they showed up for something where they, got recorded in your database, So as such, they showed up on column L, because again, column L isn't looking for demographics. It's not looking for hours. It's not looking for class or program enrollment. So we can use column L to answer that question. So what we're saying is we've got the total unduplicated number, and let me see, is the next slide? Yeah, so let's move to this slide. This is a little bit better. So you start by comparing the number of enrollees across column L. So you've got the total unduplicated students down here in column L. Right above that, you've got that those that have the no designated program. So we're going unduplicated, which is 3240, and then we're subtracting those that don't have a program. So we're basically looking at everybody in services. Again, we're saying to get into the services section, we're not looking at any criteria. So we have 3,200 or so that show up in that column in this example. 1,100 of those literally have nothing. They have no class, no program, no nothing. So the 1,107, you might say, is the universe of nothing. You know, that is the subset in column L that don't have data. So we're taking that unduplicated count and subtracting those that really have nothing and then dividing it back against the unduplicated. So you can see we basically have the 2,133 divided by 3,240. That's about 65%. So we're basically taking those numbers to look at overall of the people that just walk inside our doorway for any reason whatsoever. How many actually have program enrollment where you actually enroll them into a class that you designated for ABE or ESL or whatever. In this example, that's 65%. So a little bit more convoluted explanation here. You know, but I'm just to be clear, I see your question, Monica, but while I'm reading it, let me just make sure with everybody. Does everybody follow that little formula I gave you, yes or no? If you're saying Pearson VUE testers, if you mean the people that come in to take the GED, you know, I don't think you really have to mark that as a service. So a lot of people are saying, yes, that's a service. Yes, we want to go ahead and mark that. I'd say that's a command decision. If you're marking it that way and saying, yeah, you're providing assessment services, I guess I would say, yeah, you know, you would still mark that as a service. Obviously, they're not enrolling as a program. I think I see where you're going with that. I would say, at least for now, I wouldn't sweat that. These are just ways of looking at it. There's no formal metric that's going to give you any positive love for having high percentages. There's nothing that's going to give you anything negative if you have low percentages. So I wouldn't worry too much about where these percentages are specifically until we have more specific guidance on how we're going to look at that. So I guess I'd say if you're marking the people that take the GED at your school as receiving a service, I would say fine to mark it. I guess I would say if that's the policy you've set at your consortium, I would leave it alone. Potentially next year, if you're feeling like the percentage is more important than the item count, you might want to change it. But I'll just once again say there's no definitive yes or no answer there. Okay, everybody's got this down. So good. Again, of those who receive something instead of nothing, how many actually enrolled in a program? That's how you can calculate that. So here, moving on to the next metric. So again, my terms and my term only. That first question Neil is asking, I'm calling that CAEP program enrollment. The next question I'm calling CAEP program persistence. That is, of those who enroll in a program. That is, they do have at least 1 hour. They did enroll in a class that you designated for one of those 7 AP programs. So of those who have some kind of program enrollment, how many stuck around long enough to accrue at least 12 hours of instruction? So as you know, the people in column E need to have the 12 hours. The people who are in column L do not need the 12 hours, so we're doing more of a comparison between column E and column L now. So there's the formula right there at the bottom. I'm going to move to the next slide. So again, we're comparing column E and column L like I said. We need to take out the people without any designated program because, again, we're only looking at those who enrolled in programs. So those that showed up for services or got recorded in the database but never really did that much are going to get thrown out before we make this calculation. And then we're going to divide the total that qualify for column E because, again, you need the 12 hours to qualify for outcomes. So column E is using 12 hours. Column L is not. So we're basically dividing that total in column E with the result in column L. The result you can see is, about 66%. So we're taking that 1408, that is the unduplicated in column E, and then we're dividing it with that unduplicated number in column L. But I'll just reiterate before we do so, we're taking out those with no designated program. The way to think of it that way, you might say, is we reconciled the no designated program with that first metric Neil brought up. Now we're bringing up the second metric, so we're taking those out for the next calculation. So again, I'm doing a lot of confusing number crunching here, and I know I'm babbling a little bit. Maybe I'm babbling a lot a bit. I'll just say to humor me if nothing else, is everybody still with me after the second round of calculations, after looking at the concept that I, anyway, am terming program persistence in CAEP. Okay, everybody's saying yes. Hopefully this is clear. So we're going to move on to the next concept here. So here, this is, again, my terminology is going to be called outcomes performance. So you might say the first question with enrollment is kind of an AEP version of persistence. The second one, where we're looking at how many get at least 12 hours, is kind of an AEP program persistence. So I'd say in two different ways. Those are just two different ways at looking at that persistence concept. Now this third metric that Neil is bringing up, where he's looking at, of all those that get 12 hours, how many actually achieve outcomes. Now we're moving out of that persistence concept and looking more at performance. Again, we're looking more related to like what we're showing with Table 4. So the first two metrics I would correlate to that Persister report. This last metric I would correlate more to NRS Table 4. That is, we're using this last metric as a way to measure our program performance as opposed to those first two where we're measuring our program persistence. So here's Neil's question. Of those in a program, how many are showing progress as defined by those ABG CAEP metrics? So you can see the formula we're using is there at the bottom. Moving on to the next slide, we're going to the actual calculation. So using the same example, we look at the total. Again, we're looking at those unduplicated counts at the bottom here. So we need to add up those 6 outcomes. Again, we've got the 6 categories of AB 104, so we're simply aggregating those 6 together. And then once we come up with that sum, we're dividing it by that unduplicated students. Again, we're only looking at those who qualify for outcomes at all, so thereby it's only fair to use the unduplicated students in column E, so that's that 1408. So we add it all together, we get about 370 or so, 360, 370, divide it by 1408. So in this example, we have about 27% of our students who enroll in AP programs achieve some sort of outcome. So I can't remember what metric Neil gave you, but he gave you those statewide averages of these questions in those earlier slides, so I forget what he showed, but I think overall those first metrics in my hypothetical examples were looking pretty good in this last one. Again, it's fake data, but we're not looking so good here. So here's how we would measure our performance. Again, aggregate those 6 areas and divide it against enrollees. All right, thank you for the comments, Ramel. I'll just say, so here's another round of calculations. Sorry again, one more question, because again it's facts and figures here. I'm going to be a you-know-what and ask you one more time. We're being a stickler for figures here, but in kind of a weird way, different than what we normally would talk about. Okay, so I kind of, did the funny thing happened on the way to the forum here, where we're looking at those NRS metrics, but doing some major digression here in terms of how to look at it from an AP measuring stick rather than NRS. So whether you're using NRS reporting or AP reporting, this next diagram I see as being every bit as valid no matter which metrics you're using. So you can use NRS or AP. Of those three different ways of measuring AP, you can use any of those to kind of determine performance versus persistence. So no matter how you do those metrics, I'm simplifying our evaluation into four categories. That is, performance can be high or performance can be low. Persistence can be high, persistence can be low. So thereby that gives us the four possible ways in which our data will fall. That is, we can be high-high, we can be low-low, or we can be high-low or low-high. Hopefully everybody follows this graphic okay. I'm oversimplifying things a lot, but once you get into these metrics, you can compare it against the average. The whole point here is to intentionally set it up in such a way that you can oversimplify it. So, because we're suggesting you need to oversimplify it a little bit before you can make concrete decisions and say, yeah, we know our performance is good or bad, so here's what we need to do. We know our persistence is good or bad, so here's what we need to do. So here's the oversimplified way of looking at it, is through that simple axis. So starting with the one that's, probably going to be the smallest number, is if performance and persistence are both high. Not that unusual, but I'll just say, hey, if you're doing well in both, congratulations. Maybe you don't need to attend this webinar, who knows, but I'll just give you a Laurel and Hardy handshake if your performance is high and your persistence is also high. So I'll just say for persistence for NRS, I'm saying 70%. For those others, I forget what Neil brought up, but if you look at those earlier slides, Neil brought it up. Maybe, sorry to put it on you, Veronica, but maybe you could look back at Neil's figures and type it in. I know he had it on the slides, but I don't want to mess around with it right now. If you can't, you can't. I'll just say, Ramel, when you download the PowerPoint, look at those first 10 or 12 slides that Neil has, because he's done the statewide averages for those three questions he asked. That was what he kind of brought up at the beginning, so just use Neil's numbers for the averages. Okay, so moving on. The next one is going to be that lower right. If your performance is high but your persistence is low. First off, that's very, very unusual. The way I normally present this is from an NRS concept. I'm not going to get into all the details why, but it's not quite, but almost mathematically impossible to have high performance and low persistence from an NRS point of view. And the issue there is if you don't have a pre-post pair, how on earth can you make a pre-post gain? We'll leave it at that. With Neil's metrics, it's at least mathematically possible that your performance could be really good and your persistence will be low. But I've got to say the chances of that occurring is still very, very low. Again, very few of you are going to show up in this quadrant. If so, just know in general your persistence is low. There's probably somewhere where the data's rearing its ugly head and you just haven't found it yet. So I'll just say if you somehow fall in this quadrant, we're just saying take the same steps as if your persistence is low in this other quadrant. So moving along, that's where we're going to spend more focus, is this lower left quadrant where performance is low and persistence is low. Then we're saying, well, okay, we've got low performance. We've done the calculations either through NRS reporting or through AP reporting to determine a really, really, really big reason why our performance is suffering is because our persistence is low. For NRS reporting, if our persistence is low, we already know until we correct our persistence, there's a 99.9% chance our performance will remain low. In AP reporting, it's not that stark, but it's something close to that. Either way, we know if persistence is low, that, until we correct persistence, then and only then are we really going to be able to turn the corner on performance. So for this quadrant, we're saying let's address basic data cleanup. That is, for some of Neil's metrics, we might say we need to look at missing student demographics, gender, date of birth, race and ethnicity, and so on. In some cases, we might just need to correct attendance hours. Sometimes that means getting our students to stick around longer in class. Other times we know we have attendance hours coming out of our ears, but we just haven't done a dutiful enough a job recording it. You and only you is going to know that, but we know there are basic data cleanup issues relating to demographics and hours. Hopefully you all understand what I'm talking about there. So for all metrics, we need to address basic data cleanup issues. For those more specific persistence rates related to NRS where we're using pre and post testing, then there's that additional hang up where we also need to make sure that we're dutifully pre and post testing all learners. So we also need to look at pre and post testing rates. So when we're looking at persistence, we're not really yet concerned with the idea of whether our students are making gains, but we are concerned with the idea that everybody at least has a valid pre-post test pair. Okay, so if they have a 256, that's going to be an example of potentially that's a high-low. That would be potentially part of the 1% or lower, where in general that's not going to be a high-low, Robert. But if you actually went through those extra steps, I think what you're getting at is that high school credits outcome where, hey, they get a really high pretest, so we're going to mark their gain through high school credits. That would be that small portion of your students that potentially could be a good performer where you don't necessarily have a pre-post pair. If you just do the pre and no post, and you don't do anything related to high school credits, we'll know that's going to be, a low here, where if you don't do the post, that's just going to count against your persistence rate. You're not necessarily wrong for not tackling that, but, it's only going to be a high-low if you take those extra steps and say, yeah, we're not post-testing them because instead we're doing high school credits. So you're getting in the weeds, but again, we said this is a deep dive, so good job. Okay, good. All right, so low, we're tackling hours, we're tackling demographics, and then if we're talking about NRS or we're talking about that pre-post side, we're also talking about pre- and post-testing all learners. That's as opposed to the upper left. Obviously, these two left-hand sections is where all the rest of this laundry listing is going to be, but here in the upper left, there are other times where performance might be low, but strangely enough, persistence is high. So it might be, in terms of NRS, where we've got most of our students pre- and post-tested, but for whatever reason, our students are not doing a good job making gains. From the Neil Kelly AP ways of doing it, you might say, gee, we're doing a good job recording demographics for our students and enrolling them in a class and getting that 12 hours of instruction. But for whatever reason, we're not getting good numbers in terms of outcomes. Those would be the two situations where you might say our performance is low and our persistence is high. Okay, so I'm going to stop here. I've again been babbling, but is everybody with me here? Another sanity check. If nothing else, just to humor me. Okay, so hopefully you're all definitely getting this. I'm feeling like I'm babbling up a storm here. I'm going to have to trust you with all these yeses. Thanks for humoring me. Okay. Okay, so moving along here. So a couple of you asked about averages. So what if your persistence rates are at or below the state averages? So like we're saying, at least in terms of NRS, that's 70% or lower. So again, we're saying, yeah, you need to do a better job getting all your students tested. So again, we're saying it's pre and post testing. In other situations, it might be hours. It might be hours. So we're saying, yeah, there's steps to address these issues at both the student level and the agency level. Okay. Okay, I'm not sure where that was something that was added in. I'm not sure where that got here. But, so again, student level strategies for persistence. So again, this is if everything is low, we really need to focus on attendance. So this would be using the AAP metric or using the pre-post metric. Either way, we want to track attendance. I won't get into all these, but again, our rule of thumb is 3 or more days of absence. We want to follow up. It really boils down to what's going on between the teacher and the students. It really is unfair. Way too much falls on the teacher, quite frankly, but that's the way it ends up needing to be because of the the student relies on the teacher. The student will listen to the teacher way more than everybody else. So a lot of times it's that communication between teacher and students that makes all the difference in the world. So if your teacher has good communication, she or he will be able to do a great job of following up with those students that are absent. Another issue is be upfront when the students start to attend. Make sure they're proactive and let the teachers know if they're going to be absent. So number one, you can safeguard against students maybe not showing up again. Number two, if it affects testing, you can make sure you get the pre and post testing in before they leave for good. Okay, more attendance issues. Again, some of it might be flexibility. If your students aren't attending, you might look at it in terms of being less of a student issue and more of a you issue, you might say, where you might look at students that are not doing a good job in attendance. If you start seeing it's an epidemic where lots of students aren't attending, again, then it might be more of a you issue. You might need to review flexibility, review your class schedule, make sure that the schedule you're offering students is really the sort of schedule that works for your students. And then I think Neil brought this up. Another thing you might want to consider is alternatives. If students aren't attending at the date and time your agency is providing, you might look at things like independent study or distance learning. Okay, so all that relates to pre and post testing, but looking at the same information related to pre-post pairs. Again, lots of things you can do. This is just a taste of it. But again, over the years on the NRS side, lots of agencies have done a really good job coming up with rewards programs where you have like the posters that say get the pre-post, where you've got some agencies provide formal rewards. I'll just back up and say I've heard agencies provide rewards where the reward the agency is providing is very, very minimal. It's a school T-shirt. It's a school pencil. It's a little, a little one-page handout. It's a certificate that the secretary prints from her computer. The rewards I'm hearing about are very minor rewards, but bottom line is, they still seem to motivate students. No matter how low you go, students are still rewarded just by still motivated just by getting that reward, so that works. Relieving anxiety, making sure students aren't afraid of the test, and then there's lots of reports in TE, like student gains, learning gains, and the test summary, where you can look at those roster reports to figure out who's been tested. Okay, at the agency level, again, clear line of communication among staff, teachers, and administration. So again, you want to have team meetings where everybody knows all those who's on first issues, who needs to be prioritized, how are you going to set up testing, how are you going to report attendance, what's the administrator's job, what's the teacher's job, what's the TE data manager's job, and so on. Again, the more organized you are as an agency, the more everybody knows who's on first, the better job you'll do at all this stuff. And then for testing specifically, you want to be extra careful about testing. The agencies that do a good job look at the beginning of the year and specify very specific dates as testing dates. So at the agency level, you want to align your class schedule based on your semester or trimester schedule. That would be step one. Step two is, once you've got all that alignment done with your class schedule, figure out what days or what weeks are best for testing. Make sure you've got something set up programmatically to make sure everybody completes testing. Build in makeup days because you know students will be absent. And then up front, make sure students know at the beginning when the testing dates are. Know that if they miss, they're going to need to test anyway. Make sure they understand how important it is. The agencies that do a good job here are very upfront with students. They let students know that, yeah, it's a pain in the neck here, but hey, our agency depends on this data to stay alive, so you're really helping us out by doing the testing. Okay, so moving along here. Okay, and then here, what I'll just say is the slides I've been presenting should be things you know. If I were diagnosing everybody globally, everything I've said so far, most of you are doing well. This area that I'm bringing in on this slide, I'm quite sure the overwhelming majority are not doing well. Use the state and local assessment policies to inform staff at your local agency and state agencies of who's responsible. So everybody generally does a good job with those informal who's on first issues. The formal part of it, I know most of you do not do a good job. You know, this is where I think most people probably do need to improve, is put all of that in writing, document it in your state and local assessment policies. Again, formalize your local agency procedure for pre and post testing. Formalize in your local policy exactly what dates are your agency's testing dates. Specify in writing which individual or individuals are the ones responsible for coordinating testing. If you're doing e-tests, who specifically are your certified proctors? Who specifically are your certified coordinators, and so on? And then specifically put in writing, how are you dealing with your hard-to-reach students? How are you testing students with disabilities? How are you reaching distance learning, high school recovery, students with some of those barriers to employment? This last bullet, maybe not the biggest part of your data, but definitely the biggest part of where I know most agencies are not doing that well. If I was looking to go out of my way to ding everybody, I think I could ding just about all of you by evaluating you on the last bullet. Are you going out of your way to reach hard-to-reach students, and furthermore documenting exactly what you're doing? I realize that's a pretty high-hanging fruit sort of thing to get through, but this would be the one that I know I could ding way more than would meet through here. So make sure you've got a strategy to reach those hard-to-reach folks and put it in writing. Okay, and then you can use these reports to determine level of effort. Again, I'm talking generically here, but again, you can look at barriers to employment, look at specific federal levels, verify your test selections, and then again, if you really want to go crazy, use reports like the Persister Reports, and not only look at, whether it's an ABE problem or ESL problem, but look more specifically, hey, low-level ABE looks good, but the high levels of ABE not so much. Ditto for ESL. So again, I'm going way general here a little bit because I'm running out of time, a little bit because I wanted to focus on the data, but I've got 15 minutes, so I want to make sure I cover the other side of this. So we looked at what if your performance is low and the persistence is also low. Better put, you might say, what if your performance is low and the reason because of that is, the reason for that is specifically because our persistence is low. Here's what we can do. There will also be situations where you find that your performance is low, but then you double check things like your Persister report, and or you double check things like some of those metrics in CAEP reports we showed you earlier, and for whatever reason your persistence is actually pretty good. I'll say that what we just went over is going to be the more common example, but it's not unusual at all for you to have low performance, but good, okay to good, above average persistence. So here's what you need to do. So moving on here, again, there's steps you can do. Again, it's basically if you know that persistence is good, but performance is not, then we can pinpoint that the problem is with our student scores on the pre and post testing. If we know we're dutifully getting everybody tested, but our scores are not so good, then we know it's some sort of classroom issue. We know that as such, classroom issue can mean hundreds of things, if not thousands of things, so we can't cover all that, but here's a list of some certain things you might do. So generically, we know it's performance in the classroom. One thing we can look at is goals. A lot of you ask about goals. Goals are not required from a data point of view, but this would be one reason where goals can be helpful, is the better job you do aligning goals to what the student is doing in the classroom. A lot of times, the more engaged the student will be, the better they'll perform on the test. Align materials. Make sure that whatever textbooks, web resources, etc. you're using align with priorities at the local and state level. Make sure that placement is strong, especially if it's a pre-post issue. Look at the e-test locator, look at the appraisal, look at your agency's informal methods for placement. Make sure that if your placement process puts the student in ESL intermediate low, that student's class is intermediate low, not ESL advanced. If there's a lot of disconnects at your agency, really good chance you're going to get this problem with good persistence but low performance. Make sure what your students are expected to get out of class is what you're actually doing in the classroom. Moving along, recognize student accomplishment, sort of like rewarding. Pairs reward when they do well. What I've found out from all of you is you can offer some really seemingly minute ways of recognizing that would be kind of not so exciting things that would not motivate that many people. But I've heard a lot of you bring up really incidental ways of rewarding students that nonetheless work very, very well. So I'll just say I've heard things that are very, low on the excitement totem pole nonetheless. I think it's just the reward itself that motivates students. I don't think they really care what they get for it. They just want that formal recognition that they're doing a great job. If you do that and only that, you've gone way more than halfway to take this on. Test-taking skills, some of that test anxiety. Make sure that before they go in the lab and test, they know what they're getting into. On the instruction point of view, make sure you individualize it. Every student has unique needs. Make sure that, when you do it for a class, each student's individual needs are addressed. So just like you can never have too much recognition, you can also never have too much review. And then you can look at the student level or the class level, look at your best performers, see how your best students perform, basically share those practices with your other students. I'll just say this is something I've definitely gotten from you. I didn't make any of this up. At the agency level, do the same thing. Look at the classes that are doing best. Certain classes and certain teachers will probably do a better job than others. Look at those classes and teachers that are doing the best job. Have your lower performing teachers and lower performing classes match your higher performers. Obviously, use TE instructional reports. Look at things like competency reports, content standard reports. Those of you that did assessment to instruction yesterday, that whole hour and a half that we talked about, that whole session addresses this lower left-hand quadrant specifically, you might say. Feedback from teachers, feedback from students, you can never have more than enough. And then again, evaluate top student performers. You also at the same time evaluate your top class performers as well as your top teacher performers. Replicate those top performers. And then here again on this side of it, here is where everybody does well with what I've said so far. This is the one where I'd say most agencies fall short, is you want to formalize this, and align it to statewide priorities, align it to your population, look at your barriers to employment, your demographics, look at some of these issues that you might have with transportation and housing, a lot of those things Neil brought up, set a firm attendance policy, have your assessment policy in writing to make sure that you're doing it the same way with all students. And then again, if you're WIOA 2, you can fit that in with NRS local performance goals. Okay, so moving on here. So one thing I did want to bring up here. Sorry, I'm looking at my slides here. I'm a little unsure how much more I have to go. We're toward the end. This kind of is flapping in the wind, to be clear. I'm giving you all these laundry list areas, and then I'm getting into a data issue that's kind of flapping in the wind, but most of this relates to NRS. I'm sort of bird walking on you here. It's going to look flapping in the wind, but just so you can look at an AP example that's not quite so NRS-centric, is what you can do is look at the DIR and specifically look at these end areas. We'll have a couple specific concrete examples in the presentation we do here next week. But again, look at items 23 to 27. Specifically compare 23A through 27A with 23B through 27B. Long story short, the A's in these areas list those who qualify for AP reporting. That is, they officially earned the AP outcome. That is, you dutifully marked it for each student, and they also met all of these qualification criteria. That is, they had all the demographics marked, they had 12 or more hours, they had program enrollment, etc., and so forth. 23B through 23B through 27B list those outcomes that you dutifully marked, but those who did not qualify. So that's showing somebody where you bubbled the bubble, you checked the checkbox, but it's not showing up as an official AP outcome. Maybe it's because they didn't have program enrollment. Maybe it's because they didn't get 12 hours. Maybe they've got all that, but they're missing gender, or they're missing date of birth, or something like that. There's some of that qualifying criteria that prevented those outcomes from being marked. So what I'm saying here is you can compare 23A through 27A with 23B through 27B. If you've got most of them showing up in A but not B, that's a real good indicator that your data's clean. You've done what you can do in terms of 12 hours and demographics and so on. On the other hand, if you get high item counts in the Bs, that again is showing that, hey, you're doing a great job bubbling, but you're not necessarily doing a good job with hours and demographics. If you've got a high number there in 23A through 27A, but you still know that those numbers are not as good as it could be, well, then that might be, you're doing a good job keeping your data clean, but it might just be you need to do more of a full court press of doing more bubbling, doing more import, export, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. I'm going to pause here again because that was flapping in the wind. I didn't really have a good place to put it. Is everybody clear on the 23 through 27 of the DIR? Let's just make sure. Okay, and what I'm realizing here is this is probably like 3 presentations worth of information in 1 hour and a half. So I'll just say based on my struggles and based on my negative struggles, but your positive comments, I'll say we'll probably do this again and maybe break it down into smaller, more bite-sized morsels in the future. So bottom line is if you need to improve everything, your persistence is weak, Your performance is also weak. There's a bunch of resources. We're getting to the home stretch here. So we've got the AP TAP website. Here's the link. All sorts of wonderful things there. Veronica, if you want to add anything to this, I'll keep going, but I'll let you add something at the end if you want. We also, of course, have all the illustrious things on our CASAS website, Quick Search. EL Civics has a lot of good resources. We've got a bunch of stuff on Common Core. And then especially for these areas where we're talking about this graphic here, that is when you know that you need to improve, or you need to improve performance, you can look at competency reports, content standard reports. That is, you can use your assessment results to inform instruction. Okay, here's the AP website. And then on our website, we've got CASAS Quick Search. So if you determine that the performance side is what you really need to fix, you've looked at the class, you know that there's an issue with materials. We don't have materials available for sales at CASAS, but we do have this feature called Quick Search on our website. It's free of charge. You can basically search the database for instructional materials. It has textbooks, web resources, CDs, DVDs, etc. EL Civics website. This is intended for WIOA 2 funded agencies for EL Civics, but the website itself is open to everybody. I'll just say, especially for ESL programs, there's gobs and gobs of great resources here, way more than you'd ever, know what to do with. What I'll just say is this sounds a little, yeah, right, but it's true. I've had people from other states that have nothing to do with California payment points tell me at national conferences and so on that they've found our EL Civics website and they use it a lot. The outcomes part means nothing to them, but it's such a good resource for ESL curriculum, ESL lesson planning tips, and so on, but especially for ESL, pretty much everything you need and more for quality ESL instruction there. Okay, and then a lot of ways where you can align to Common Core. Lots of info there. Email me if you want more info on that. And then, here's a bunch more stuff all the way around. The CASAS data portal, like I said, lots of reports and TE. There's promising practices on our website for NRS WIOA 2. There's something on the AP website called Practices of Promise, which is more for AP. The similar but not exactly the same title tells you how similar it is. The American Community Survey is another great way to get more data. The CASAS data portal, here's the slide on it. Bethany asked a really good question earlier. It just has NRS data, but you can look at performance rates and persistence rates. You can look all the way back to 2004-05. You can run it statewide or by individual agency. There's gobs and gobs of ways to run the data. I think back on the previous slide, we have some links for you, but go to our CASAS website, look up the data portal, and, you can get all kinds of good information there. Here's the link right here. Here's some basic instructions of where to find it on our website. Let me know if you need more information. And then that's all I have. So I've got 2 minutes left. Again, way more slides. I'll just say this is something I've kind of been doing on the NRS side. I've also done this presentation at CAEP a few times for our national audience. This is the first time I've done it for AAP. I think it has lots of good applications here. I'll admit this was probably at least 3 presentations worth of information. So if I do it again, I'll break it down into bite-sized morsels. I'll just say if you have any immediate feedback, let me know. I'll just say please send me information for what you want more of. If you have anything specific on how to break it down, because I know it's that. Thank you for the positive feedback. I'm going to take the money and run, or I'll take the ball and run with it more. But I know this was way too much to some extent, I'll say that's positive because everybody latched onto this more positively than I thought. I really thought some of this you'd like and some of this maybe not so much. But knowing that you like it, I'm going to just say, hey, let me know what you need more of, in particular how I need to break it down, because I'm probably going to need to do this again, but do it in 3 different presentations. All that said, next week, we're going to pick up where we left off. It's going to be way TMI then, too. I'll probably try to avoid too much TMI, talk about Department of the Redundancy Department there. But again, I'll try to pare it down. But I think based on this, we'll offer this again, maybe in smaller morsels than this one. But again, look for it more. If you've got an aspect of this that you really want to dig deeper on, please let me know. Okay, some of the TE, yeah, I think that's a good idea. Veronica downloaded the PowerPoint. To your question, Amy, good idea, although there are easy ways of doing it. We'll be getting a little bit more into that next week. Yeah, Laurel and Hardy handshake. I don't know who, anyway, something about brimmed hats on that one. Okay, so thank you much, and look for more of this. Please email me or email Veronica if you have any specific suggestions. Bethany, go ahead. Does Bethany still have a question, Veronica? I'm officially going to stay quiet. Yeah.
Yes.
So much so you're going to talk.
Original question.
Did you crash the party there at Veronica's booth?
Bethany's original question was, so students need to have 12 plus hours to achieve an outcome, correct?
Yes, that's correct. That's what we got in the gory detail there was we looked at column E to measure that. We looked at column E to measure that because that column requires 12 hours.
Okay, and she says thank you.
All right. All right, so sorry about the TMI, but I'm going to take this as encouragement, not discouragement. And I just know this is several presentations. What I'll also bring up is we'll do the deeper dive next week. Again, 1 more hour and a half isn't going to be deep enough, as you're all saying. But what we're going to look at doing is doing the deeper dive regionally throughout March, April, May at a few lab trainings where we can do more related to right-clicking, drill down, and so on. So thank you very much. I'll be quiet now and let Veronica take over. She probably thought I'd never be quiet, so she could kind of close this up. Sorry, Veronica.
No, you're totally fine. And thank you so much, Jay, for the wealth of information that you presented this afternoon. Again, if you have not registered for next week's webinar, which is a deeper dive on this area, please be sure to register. I posted the link in the chat pod. In addition, if you have any other needs regarding student data reporting that you would like Jay to address in future webinars or in-person workshops, please be sure to send them to TAP, and then we'll forward that information on to Jay. That information can also be captured in the evaluation that I'm getting ready to open as soon as we close this webinar. Again, TAP is here to support you and assist you, so if you have any support requests, please be sure to send them on. Again, thank you all for participating this afternoon, and thank you, Jay, and we'll be back next week on Wednesday, February 27th at 12 o'clock p.m. Until then, everyone have a great rest of the week.
Thank you very much.